Good afternoon, meteorologist Mike Linden coming at you live from the MyRadar studio here in Orlando, Florida. 2021, specifically the month of December, just doesn't want to give up when it comes to severe weather. It has been an incredibly active end to the year. I mean, we're post-Christmas now, and we're talking about another round of severe weather. Let's jump right into the MyRadar app before we get to meteorologist Matthew Cappucci. I just want to show you what is going on right now. So if you look at the app on the toolbar on the bottom of it, you can see the layers menu. It looks like a stack of cards there. If you tap on that, we can actually turn on the weather outlooks. And this is the graphic from the Storm Prediction Center. All you have to do is hover over the area that you want to see. And up here in the top right, I'm using an iPad. It may look just a little different on a mobile phone, but you can see this orange color. We can really turn up the opacity as well. Here, I'll crank it up for you. That orange outline is an enhanced risk for severe weather. That is a 3 out of 5 on the Storm Prediction Center's scale. It's, again, that orange color. That has now been extended into portions of Georgia, but it is covering Tennessee, a portion, again, of Georgia, Alabama, as well as Mississippi. In terms of what we are expecting to see out of this event, well, at least for right now, we're not necessarily getting any of the really nasty severe stuff just yet, but damaging winds, large hail, possibly larger than an inch, as well as a few isolated tornadoes are expected with this event. One more thing I want to show you here in the app before we bring in Matthew. Right at the top here, you have your options for different versions of the radar: classic, high def, temperature map, and then per station. This is part of the Pro Radar pack, which you can unlock in the settings in the app, but this enables you to be able to tap on an individual radar site, and it will give you some really in-depth information here, let alone the reflectivity. But if you tap on this crosshair on the right-hand side of the map, you'll be able to choose between composite reflectivity, and various other products. We're going to switch to velocity because this is going to be a very important product when you're talking about dealing with rotation. Of course, when we're talking about rotation, we're talking about the possibility of tornadoes. Now, you're going to see green and red, two colors. The green representing winds going toward the radar site and red going away from the radar site. So when you begin to see some abnormalities within the velocity scans, that is when you can really start to key in on whether or not there's the presence of a mesocyclone and the presence of a potential funnel cloud and thus a tornado as well. Another interesting product that we just added earlier this year, the correlation coefficient. This is going to show you debris being lofted vertically into the air, or really any objects being lofted vertically into the air. So again, not seeing anything just yet, but that is certainly something that we will be watching here as the day progresses. I want to bring in meteorologist Matthew Cappucci. Matthew, it has certainly been a month to remember for many reasons. Temperature records being smashed, snow records being smashed, and here we are dealing with yet another threat of severe weather. I also want to bring up that the Storm Prediction Center issuing a hatched area. We actually have that graphic. So Matt, if you want to pull that up here, a 10% hatched area for the northern portion of both Mississippi and Alabama. And what that means when you're seeing those hash marks there and that black arrow there, that is representative of the potential of an EF2 or greater tornado within about 25 miles of a point, that being somewhere within that 10% mark. This was just added earlier this morning, and this seems to be, Matthew, a situation that is rapidly evolving. First of all, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. But what are you looking at when you're looking deeper into the data as to how this event is likely to play out and why we're dealing with it in the first place?
Yeah, this month, like you said, has been kind of off the charts in terms of severe weather activity. We've seen more tornadoes this month than we have in some Mays, and it's hard to believe it's December. 3 or 4 big-time warm-ups. The first one early in the month setting 4 statewide records. The second one bringing those devastating Kentucky tornadoes. And the third part of derecho. So now there's another warm-up and understandably more severe weather. Right off the bat, I'm seeing very high dew points in the upper 60s to around 70. The dew point, I measure how much moisture is in the atmosphere. And when you see dew points around 70, that's like stepping outside into a sauna. That's like when you go from air conditioning to outdoors, your glasses start to fog up. I've been there, I've done that. I can tell you it's juicy atmosphere out there today. So we definitely have the fuel for storms. I think the biggest limiting factor with this particular setup is which way the winds are going. So it's really tough to pinpoint whether or not we'll have regular supercells, individual storms that can kind of go away from all the other storms and not have to compete with neighbors, or if they'll merge into a line. So right now, storm mode is the biggest limiting factor. We just don't really know that quite yet. That said, there are a lot of things that point to this being kind of a significant severe weather event. And like you said, there's that hatched risk for higher end tornado potential as well in parts of Mississippi, Alabama, and southwestern Tennessee. So we have the juice, we have this wind speed and direction with height, thanks to changing winds in the atmosphere. And that induces twist, in part spin on these storms. So any storms that do get going, if they grow tall enough through multiple layers of atmosphere, will be subject to sheared or a turning force. So there's that potential for rotation. Again, we have those two factors kind of next to each other. It's a little bit concerning. The other thing, too, there's sort of a stalled boundary, meaning, in other words, kind of like railroad tracks along which these storms can propagate. So already there are multiple flash flood warnings out. Even the fact that we're in December doesn't mean you can't have higher end flooding. So flooding is a risk today as well. Apropos of the tornado risk, ultimately will depend on, like we said, if you get those isolated storms. One thing I am watching, though, I think the risk is better in northern parts of Mississippi, northwestern Alabama, and perhaps southern and southwestern Tennessee. I think you go farther south, yes, it'll still be warm, but you won't have as much in the way of forcing, as much of a push. So, like we said, we got the wind shear, we got the juice. The only real limiting factor I see, other than storm mode, is how much of a push there is, how much of a triggering mechanism there is. This trigger isn't overly strong, but as we've seen in recent weeks, when you have this much instability out there, even meager triggers can cause big results.
So, Matthew, when we look again at the MyRadar app here, as you touched on that stalled out kind of boundary, it's right here, somewhat over cutting the state of Tennessee in half. And as Matthew alluded to, you have the warm and the cold air kind of jockeying for position. It's much like the line of scrimmage in a game of football where you have the offensive and defensive lines just fighting for position, and that's what's happening. Eventually, that cold air is going to win out, but at least as of right now, as Matthew touched on, much like train tracks, you're going to see all of that moisture kind of riding right along it. Not to mention that right behind this event is a very large sweeping cold front. And again, you can see all of this by going into the MyRadar app in the layers menu and turning on fronts there. One other thing I want to do here is turn on the temperatures. And you touched on this, Matthew, as well. Out ahead of the front, we have temperatures in the mid to high 60s, even as warm as the low 70s right now in Birmingham, Alabama. Just behind that front, I mean, look at this, 70 degrees in Memphis, but just behind the front, a 15-degree drop-off. So what's going on here, Matthew? I mean, again, it's late December. This is not exactly something we would expect to find this time of the year, but lo and behold, here we are.
Yeah, one thing that really surprised me with this front was that on Monday when I was doing weather here in D.C., it was 41 degrees in D.C. at the same time. It was 70 in Cincinnati, just about 300 miles away. So there's a very sharp contrast. Then last night, we here in D.C. were on the warm side of the boundary, so temperatures in the mid-50s. At the same time, Cincinnati was 4 degrees cooler than us. So like we said, very sharp, very steep gradient, and that's why we're getting that triggering mechanism. That's why we're getting that boundary to generate these storms. There will be a couple of different types of storms. So in the warm sector, south of the boundary, that's where we'll have the most vigorous storms that have the potential for largish hail, damaging wind, and tornadoes as well. So that's where we're monitoring the severe weather risk. But along the boundary, we got something called overrunning, where warm air from the south rides up and over that cool air behind the boundary, thanks to something called, thanks to the jet stream, kind of like a ramp pushing that warm air upwards. That warm air condenses, the moisture in it condenses as well, and you get heavy rainfall along just north of the boundary. So that's why, like we said, we have 2 flash flood warnings in effect right now, where those downpours have trained. Northwestern parts of Alabama, actually, we've already seen about 2.5 inches of rain so far in the past 24 hours, and more is on the way, so we have saturated soils as well. But the fact that we have this much of a just big, warm sector is incredibly impressive and really something that I very rarely see in the month of December.
Well, looks like something there is letting you know about something in your very busy schedule there, Matthew. I know that you have many alarms set up here, so if you want to turn that one off, that would be great. No worries, it's all good. So while Matthew is turning off that alarm, hey folks, this is what happens when you're live, right? What we want to show you next is a satellite loop, specifically of water vapor. And this is a, let's see if we can pull that loop up here. Matthew's back. We're good now. So we have in the back pulling the strings here. We have another Matt behind the scenes here. Big shout out to Matt. So Matt, if you want to pull up that water vapor imagery, there we go. Perfect. So you talked about the juice, Matthew, and Matt, you can leave this up for a little bit. You talked about the juice being present in the atmosphere. We're looking at the water vapor imagery here. What jumps out at you?
Couple things right now. So this is just a beautiful display of kind of the dynamics of the atmosphere. So first, I want to focus on western Oklahoma, southern Colorado, and northeastern New Mexico. It's really tough to tell, but you can just barely discern a little bit of a swirl there. That's our trigger. That's our system. Ahead of it, because lows have counterclockwise swirls, you get that jet, that little streak you see of moisture riding up from kind of the Trans-Pecos of Texas up to the Arklatex and eventually towards the mid-Missouri Valley. So that's that strip of moisture. So ahead of this system, you're boosting the amount of moisture, you're boosting the instability in the atmosphere, and at the same time, that lobe of spin is approaching from the west. Now, when you have these pockets of spin, of vorticity, they do a couple things. Yes, you get storms to rotate when that approaches, but at the same time, the advection or the arrival of increasing vorticity, increasing spin, can induce upward motion in the atmosphere. Think about when you have an ice skater spin. All of a sudden, if they spin faster, that's usually because they're kind of drawing their arms in, and they can even put their arms up. So same thing is happening here too over the southeast. You're seeing a couple of storms already break out right now in parts of Mississippi, Alabama, even Georgia and the Carolinas. That's thanks to the ascent ahead of this lobe of vorticity, this lobe of spin, because pockets in the atmosphere are starting to feel a little bit more spin, a little bit more vorticity, and as a result, they're being stretched upwards, and that's what we're seeing now. So this pocket will induce ascent, will induce more spin, will induce a lot of things that could lead to a decent severe weather event, a level 3 out of 5 from the Storm Prediction Center, and like we said, that chance of even a couple tornadoes, 1 or 2 of which may be significant.
So we'll round things out here by taking a look at that threat and what the outlook is, again, from the Storm Prediction Center. As Matthew just touched on, that orange color, that is the enhanced risk, which has since been expanded since it was issued earlier this morning. It now covers a small portion of northwestern Georgia, a portion of Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, and as far west as Arkansas. Again, that stalled boundary just going to continue to be the driving force, if you will, to what we are soon to see as we head into the afternoon. I might mention as well, things are getting going a little bit faster than initially anticipated. The Storm Prediction Center also considering issuing a tornado watch here within the next hour or so. So things are developing very quickly. Again, the biggest threat of what we may see out there today will likely be those strong, damaging winds, possibly stronger than 50 miles per hour. As well as, again, the possibility for some of those tornadoes, a few of which could be quite strong, especially in that hatched area. And that, once again, is along the northern portion of both Mississippi and Alabama, and slightly so into southern Tennessee.
Place. But a lot of folks in the Deep South don't have basements because of the water table construction type, for which reason, if there is a tornado or tornado threat, you want to place as many layers between yourself and the outside world as you can. Don't want to be near windows, glass can shatter. You want to almost pretend you're bundling up for the winter time, but instead of having layers on your body. An interior hall is the best. Closet, even better. Something kind of small. Pretend you need like a cubby or something. The bathroom, a good place too, particularly on the lowest floor, because bathrooms are usually reinforced. They have a lot of plumbing nearby. And as a result, all those pipes on the outside give you an extra layer of protection. So that's great there. Anything you can do to get away from the exterior is all great. You just want to avoid windows if you can. One thing I always recommend, especially as we head into severe weather season during the spring, February, March, April, big time months for severe, it's always good to kind of have like a go bag or a kit or something you can have ready in the event you need to shelter. You always want to wear closed-toed shoes because in the event that a tornado does impact your straight line winds and there's damage outside, it's good to make sure that your feet are protected. Bike helmets, especially for the kiddos, something great because remember about 80% of tornado-related fatalities occur thanks to head trauma and head injury, so you want to make sure that you can protect against that if you are under a threat as well. And anything you can do to entertain the kids too. If you're going to shelter, it's good to make sure that you have at least something to distract them because, you know, it's a tough time for the family. You want to make sure that it is not a horrible experience. Of course, if the kids know that shelter is a good option, it's a fun time, they'll be more prone to sheltering in the future, which is something we always want to see. If we can move along graphically, I also want to talk briefly about the Saturday threat as well. And Matt Hyland, you may have that graphic of what looks like a big sweeping dip in the jet stream. As we head into the weekend, we have a second system we're watching right now. It is a lobe of spin near the Baja California Peninsula. We'll get to that in just a second. This graphic you're seeing right now shows the winds that we're facing currently in the upper levels of the atmosphere, about, I'd say, 10-ish thousand feet above the ground. And you can see they're moving out of the west-southwest along that kind of boundary we were talking about earlier. The fact that we have winds moving out of the west-southwest means that any storms are going to go kind of southwest to northeast, riding along that boundary, and as a result, I think their ability to stay supercells may be limited. So that's why, you know, the steering flow is kind of parallel to the boundary. There's a likelihood that one storm will fire along the boundary, move along the boundary, a second storm will do the same, third might do the same, and eventually they might start to merge. And so we do have that tornado risk, but it'll likely be maximized in the first 2 to 3 hours of the convective life cycle, where storms are isolated before they start kind of blowing up along the boundary. Let's head to our next graphic, see what that is. We'll kind of break down for you what we can. So here we see this is the amount of spin in the atmosphere. You'll notice with this particular setup today, there's not a ton of it. In other words, yeah, we have kind of that trigger off towards, it looks like the Mississippi River, but really it's more broad, it's diffuse. So we do have a severe weather risk, but it's a level 3 out of 5. It's not a higher end category. And moving along, we'll show you kind of more dynamics of what's going on in the atmosphere. In advance of the next graphic, please. We'll be able to show folks really what we're grappling with in terms of the severe weather threat. I do also want to mention, if we can advance, what's going on as we head towards the weekend, because this is one of multiple rounds of severe weather we're tracking. Tomorrow we could have some remnant showers and thunderstorms over the southeastern United States, a few of which could be marginally severe and have kind of a broad tornado risk, not a big one, but just a marginal risk there. Friday, we kind of get a break to catch our breath, and then Friday night, we're watching storms break out once again near the Mississippi River. I'd say Memphis to perhaps Jonesboro, Arkansas, and northwestern parts of Mississippi as well. We'll notice that too. So let's get past this to the next graphic, please. We're talking about the weekend now. And I think the weekend threat is something that we'll have to watch because it gets going Friday night across parts of the mid-Missouri and mid-Mississippi Valley. Ultimately, that will expand as we head into Saturday. Now, the solution for Saturday is kind of tricky because we just don't know yet at this point if we'll have supercells, if we won't have supercells, because there's a lot of shear, but that shear, once again, is along the boundary. There's that, and the fact we don't know quite how strong the jet stream will be. The European model is simulating about 90 knots at halfway up in the atmosphere. The American GFS model is saying about 115 knots. That's a big difference, about 25 knots. And so the American GFS model, suddenly you might have shear overcoming some of the other dynamics. We'll have to watch that. Here you see, this is what we have going on for the weekend. So a system over Baja Peninsula and over the upper Midwest and in northwestern U.S. start to kind of merge together. They phase. We roll through this once again. Watch them sort of combine near the Four Corners region. Now, one impulse jets out ahead of it. That could touch off the event on Friday night before that bigger sweeping trough arrives for Saturday, ahead of which warm, moist air will set the stage for strong to severe storms over much of the deep south, and ultimately you'll have that chance of widespread severe weather. The tricky call is whether or not we'll get tornadoes. We'll have to see. Eventually, that trough makes it to the East Coast in a weekend state. In D.C., we could be near 70 degrees on Saturday into Sunday morning for a big-time cool-down. They'll mark kind of our last severe weather threat for a while as much colder air builds in behind it. But like we said, multiple rounds of severe thunderstorms you're tracking. One today, a few maybe straggling storms tomorrow across the southeastern U.S., Friday night across portions of the Mississippi Valley, and then a broad area across the Deep South on Saturday. So we can't really catch a break until we head into early next week. But, Mike, there's a lot going on in the weather department.
Thanks for stretching there, Matthew. Appreciate it very much. Whenever you give a meteorologist the opportunity to talk, I mean, you take it and run with it, of course. You certainly know. So again, as Matthew touched on, looking to be very active here toward the tail end of 2021. Got to mention as well, New Year's Eve. If you plan on being out for New Year's Eve and heading into New Year's Day with the possibility of severe weather, it's certainly something to pay very close attention to. One other thing I want to add before we say goodbye is to do not rely on a tornado siren as a means of signaling that a tornado is on the way to your location. You want to be sure that you have your phone charged up. The MyRadar app will send you those notifications to let you know if there's a severe thunderstorm warning, a tornado warning, and so on. So you want to be sure that you have that. If you are to lose power and if you're to lose cellular connectivity, I should mention, a NOAA weather radio, an invaluable tool. Maybe a little too short notice to go out and grab one right now at this moment, but it's certainly something to keep in mind as we head into severe season into 2022. So that's probably going to do it for our deep dive here, looking at all things severe. Thank you very much, Matthew, for joining us. I really appreciate it. And of course, we will keep everything up to date on the MyRadar social media platforms. They're above my head, I believe, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. We are everywhere. We're also streaming right now live on Twitch and LinkedIn, brand new streaming platform for us. So again, be sure to keep in the loop and up to date as this severe weather threat unfolds. For meteorologist Matthew Cappucci, I've been meteorologist Mike Linden. Stay safe out there, everybody. We'll catch you back here soon. See ya.